Religion and the challenges of modernity. When you say to a Jew, there are challenges, or the challenges of modernity, I want you first to understand the lenses that we wear when we look at challenges. Now, to do so, I have to tell a joke, which you won't find funny, because it's a joke that Jews tell to Jews about you. Now, there's a lot of different yous here, but the purpose of these jokes is never to be accurate. And you're not really telling it about you. When you tell a joke about somebody else, you're really telling the joke about yourself. Ethnic jokes, at least when they're harmless. When they're harmful, that's another story. When they're harmless, very often are a window into understanding how the person who's telling the joke sees themselves. Well, it's told about you. It goes something as follows. I'll tell you 3 versions of it. Or 3 types. They're more or less the same. The first one goes, someone asks one of you, how are you? And they answer, fine. I told you you wouldn't find that funny. Now, in our community, that's funny. You answered fine? Version 2. After dinner, you just finished eating. Oh, would you like more? No, thank you. We find that funny. Version 3. A mother turns, a son calls his mother and says, I know I was planning on coming over tonight, but my plans changed and I can't come. And her answer is, fine. Now, there's actually hundreds of these. You see, we Jews worry. The answer is never fine. There's always something wrong. Why don't you want more? You're not feeling well. You don't like me. There has to be something. Now, we have cause for worrying. We've had a difficult history. Hasn't been simple. The fact that I'm here is more or less a miracle. Wasn't simple being a Jew for the last 2,000 years. Wasn't. We weren't exactly the beloved people in history. It was difficult. So we have a natural tendency to worry about a lot of things. The famous claim, just because I'm paranoid, it doesn't mean the world really doesn't hate me. So we do have cause. So when we look at something that's different, when we come to modernity, it's natural for us to worry. We are worriers. But there's another reason why we worry. We don't simply worry only because of a difficult past. We also worry because our tradition set a standard for us. Exodus 19, God says to the Jewish people, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. The whole Bible is basically the story of God's frustration at our not being able to live up to that expectation. Now, nobody could really live up to that expectation. Which human being could be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation? Which nation could be that? But the meaning behind that verse was never to define that which we ought to or ever can fulfill, but to set for ourselves a sense of duty and obligation to strive for something. If in the world of philosophy and ethics, duty ought implies can, that is not true in the Jewish tradition. Ought does not imply can. Ought implies get to work. And you will fail. And that is fine. And you're going to get up and you're going to take another step forward. And how many steps forward you get is what's going to define you as a human being. The greatness of a life is not judged by what it achieves, but by the nobility of its aspirations. And our tradition, from its inception, took a slave people who were unbelievably mediocre. If you look at the Jewish people in the desert, this is a not very impressive. Not very impressive, really. And to that people, God says, you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And that defines the way Jews look at history and at life. We worry because life has been difficult, but we also worry because it is our challenge to always grow and improve. And when I come to look at the challenges of modernity, I worry. I worry because it's in my nature. But the greatest source of my worry is whether modernity can be a platform for the Jewish people's fulfilling of our core mission. Whether modernity is a platform within which we can excel and at least continue to move forward in the direction of being a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Modernity has changed completely the rules of the game for the Jewish people. I'm going to be speaking about Judaism. I imagine many of the things that I'm going to say aren't particular to the Jewish people. Maybe we just worry about them a little more. Also, when you're only about 13 million people in the world, you don't have a large margin of error. You can't sort of say, okay, well, we lost a few. Assimilation took its toll. We need to be challenged. And the challenges of modernity is an appropriate category for the way our people and my religious tradition are thinking about this new reality within which we find ourselves. The fundamental, and there are so many, but I believe the most fundamental shift that occurs in the modern era, and for our people, modernity starts somewhere in the middle of the 18th century. And it's accelerated further and reaches its total force in the middle of the 20th century. And there are certain reasons which froze it and delayed it, but it begins in the 18th century. Prior to the 18th century, Jews had what can be called a singular identity. By that I mean that Judaism defined every aspect of the life of a Jew. If you saw a Jew, there's one thing that they were, and that is they were Jewish. And being Jewish defined every single dimension of their being. From their faith, to their practices, to the community within which they lived, to their friends, to their status as citizens, as in their societies, non-members, to their economic status, usually very poor. We were the outsiders of society, forbidden to be citizens, for citizenship was contingent on religious affiliation and we had the wrong one. Lived, we knew where, a Jew, I knew where you live. You live in the ghetto. We knew a lot about you. And when you walked through life, your being Jewish engulfed was the single lens through which you saw the world and you saw yourself. That's who you were. And it's for that reason, despite extensive attempts and incentives to Jews to leave, apostasy or conversion outside of Judaism was a statistically insignificant phenomena in Jewish history, which is quite fascinating. If you think about where we were and other religious traditions were saying, come. We didn't go, not because it wasn't enticing, and it was. Our life was miserable. Very often, I always say, I feel very, like I would have said to God, thank you for choosing me. When you're ready to be a mensch, give me a call. In the meantime, I'm going to check out Jesus. I wouldn't have raised my kids. How could I have? Into that suffering. It would have been crazy. 17th century. If you live in Russia and you're Jewish, your kids are taken, or 18th century, your kids are taken away from you at the age of 12 or 10 for 10 years of military service under the intent that if we get them early enough, they'll never return as Jews. Now, I'm out of there, but we didn't leave. And the reason why we didn't leave is because when you have a singular identity, you can't even imagine leaving. Because fundamentally, you don't choose who you are. A singular identity is an identity you inherit. You can choose to leave it, but doing so is rare and usually a sign of psychological instability. Some theological epiphany, I saw a light and leave. It's very, very rare. For when you have only one lens, you can't even see another story. You can't even imagine yourself in a different form of life, in a different identity. And so even though we were a small people dispersed around the world, Jews around the world had something profoundly in common, and every single Jew was rooted in a very clear and strong foundation, that of their faith and of their national identity. And together it created a singular identity which was extremely powerful. In the middle of or towards the end of the 18th century, with the formation of the modern nation states, i.e. states where membership is not contingent on your religious affiliation, the test case became, what are we going to do with the Jews? Can a Jew now be a citizen of France? And Napoleon sends a letter to the Jewish community and asks them, can you be loyal citizens of France? And that's a new question, because up till then, of course you couldn't be. You couldn't be a Frenchman, because you were what? A Jew. That was clear. And Napoleon says, we're doing something different now. There's a new community, a new collective association. Could you join? And the Jewish community gets together and returns the following response. We can be Frenchmen of Jewish persuasion. And for the first time, the notion of complex identity enters into the Jewish collective narrative. We never had complex identities. Maybe in the times of the Bible, when we wanted to be Jewish and idolatrous at the same time. But that's because we weren't fully, Judaism hadn't yet, was more God's idea than our idea. In the times of Jesus, we didn't have a complex identity. Jesus was a Jew. We had debates. We had disagreements. And there were numerous disagreements amongst Jews. But at the core, we didn't debate our essential identity. Now, what we responded to Napoleon becomes a phenomena that defines Jewish life and Jewish history for the next 200 years. Instead of a singular identity, now we have multiple identities, complex identities. If you wish, instead of a circle, imagine the Olympics. Multiple spheres, where we feel equally at home in all of them. Being Jewish ceases to be the sole lens I wear. It is only one of the lenses that I wear some of the time. I have my Jewish lens. I have my American lens. I have my economic status lens. I have the neighborhood I live in lens. I have the job lens. All of these are things that define my identity. I'm a lawyer. I'm an American. I'm middle class. I vote Democrat or Republican or whatever it is that I might vote. I'm trying to be politically correct because I don't know you. And all of a sudden, and this is, I want to make very clear, it's not that modernity creates a supermarket place of ideas which I have to choose from. It's much more complicated than that. Modernity creates multiple identities in which I live and feel comfortable in multiple spheres simultaneously, and I move back and forth between them. I have my Jewish community and my Jewish faith, and it has its place. And then I leave it and I go somewhere else. And I have another hat. And I don't always wear my Jewish hat. I move back and forth. And the more open modernity is, and the more you live in liberal modern societies, the more, not simply choices, the more identities you have and feel comfortable with. When we speak about the phenomena of intermarriage or interfaith marriage between Jews and people of other faiths, whether it's a problem or not a problem, for whom it's a problem, whether rabbis or who should perform marriage, let's hold all of that aside. The fact that I could envision myself marrying someone of another faith assumes that I perceive myself as having an identity which I can have in common with my spouse, which is independent of either of our religious affiliation and identities. I know I'm Jewish, so, nobody finds somebody who's exactly like themselves. And if you're really looking for someone who's exactly like yourself, you know what that's called? Single. You never will. It will never happen. You can't. It's impossible. So, differences. So I have my Jewishness. So then, I'll have my Hanukkah, and you'll have Christmas. We'll have the Hanukkah bush, and we'll have the Christmas candelabras. We'll do a lot of things, but I will find ways. The phenomena of 50% of the Jewish people today, close to 50%, marrying people outside of the Jewish faith. Over 50% of all children born today to the Jewish community are born of only one Jewish spouse, is an indication of how profoundly complex the identity of the Jewish people is. And by complex, I mean complex as distinct from singular. We feel very comfortable. Now, the phenomena of this complex identity creates a very significant challenge to my religion and to my people. When you have a singular identity, you don't have to choose to be Jewish. You have to choose to leave. The default is remaining who you are. When you have complex identities, every identity will only surface in your life to the extent that you actively choose to allow it to surface in your life. What that means is that a Jew could be Jewish in the past with a very mediocre Jewish education. They didn't have to study as much. They didn't even have to like Judaism as much. It's yours. It's like your family. You like your parents, you don't like your parents. You're stuck. There's a sense of, it's like who I am. Today, I'm not stuck. I don't have to focus on my Judaism. I could go to synagogue on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, call it the high holidays, pay my dues literally, and that's it. I'm Jewish for 2 days. 3, depends which denomination you belong to. That's it. And if I do so, I'm actually one of the more serious Jews. Because 50% don't even belong at all. So I'll do my Jewish thing, and then I go on. If Judaism is going to survive in a world of complex identities, it requires a level of commitment and a level of knowledge unparalleled in Jewish history. That which in the past only the elite needed to do, that which in the past only an elite needed to study and know, is now the basic minimal standard of what's required to be a Jew. You see, not only must you actively choose, and that choice must be grounded on knowledge, on experience, on excitement. It has to be a place you want to be a part of. Because if I have multiple identities, why go to the place that's uninteresting or that it doesn't challenge you or it's unexciting? Why be there? More than that, in the past, there was a profound and very deep psychological process which was required if you chose to leave and to assimilate. You had to reject your parents. You had to reject your past. You had to reject your memories. You had to change everything about you. Today, if I have complex identities, there is no angst associated with dropping one of them. Because I'm never in a moment of loneliness. I'm never lost. Because my life is filled. I have another identity. If this one is not important, I don't have to reject it. Assimilation doesn't require a conscious effort. It just requires of you to ignore it. And it will die by being atrophied, not being fed. I don't even have to consciously say, I don't believe in God, I don't like Judaism, or nothing. You just find yourself 4 years later, what did I do Jewishly? I showed up somewhere for 2 days. I fasted for a day. That's not such a big deal. And all of a sudden, what should I teach this to my children? What is there even to teach? What's there to carry on? It's easier to leave, and it requires much more to stay. This is the first fundamental challenge of complex identities. And are we prepared to do that? Are we prepared? And I would tell you, by and large, the Jewish people today are not prepared. They are not setting the foundations necessary to make the type of choices that they need to make. Whether it involves commitment, it involves the building of institutions that they don't criticize but actually inspire them. Whether they require of themselves and their children to know and to build a life, a Jewish life, which is filled with joy, vitality, and meaning, a sphere of identity which you're called to be a part of because it's an essential, vital part of your being. Are we willing to invest in that? We are coasting. In a moment, I'll tell you what we're coasting from. But modernity thus creates a fundamental challenge of choice, which requires a redefinition and a realignment of the way we think, the way we educate, what we do, our priorities. That's challenge number one of choice. The second challenge of a complex identity is what I will call the loss of the particular. When you're looking at these identities, say, why belong to Judaism? Why choose this identity over others? Very often what you tend to do is try to find peak experiences or peak definitions of your Jewishness which say, yes, this identity is, could compete because this is about repairing the world. This is about justice and eternity, etc. And you when you're competing, you attempt to solve this choice by answering it through these great momentous ideas and values. Like if you'd ask the average Jew today, what's the most important thing in Judaism? They'll tell you the term tikkun olam. Tikkun olam means to repair the world. The fact that that doesn't exist in the Jewish tradition doesn't matter to them. Doesn't matter. It's a new one. It's an interesting phenomenon why it was chosen. Tikkun olam. In the Jewish tradition, we have tikkun olam b'malchut Shaddai, to repair the world under the kingdom of heaven, but we forgot the kingdom of heaven and we just have repairing the world, some form of universal ethics, of some form. But one of the interesting things about human beings is that we're not so interesting. And our identities really aren't, or if we really understand and come to terms with our humanity, you don't build an identity. You don't build a relationship through great ideas alone. If there are no peak experiences, it's not an identity worthy of perpetuation. But if it's only built on these peak identities, it's missing the details, the complexities, the color, which every individual and particular life provides for you. What's going to create a Jewish identity? Tikkun olam or keeping Shabbat? It's easy. It's keeping Shabbat. Could you build and perpetuate a Judaism on a notion of repairing the world? Or is it Friday night, sitting down, shutting off the television, not using the phone, sitting down with your family and talking for 3 hours and singing together and discussing the portion of the week? And I know we haven't solved the problems of Darfur at that Friday night. And there's injustice all over the world. But the actual living reality of being a Jew, or of any identity, you don't get married to repair the world. Your relationship with your children is not defined by, yes, together we're going to combat hunger. You play ball together. You take walks together. You have a barbecue. You go to the movies. We don't dance from great ideas to great ideas. A life must have great ideas, but we live in the midst of particular rhythms which define the culture, the language through which we see ourselves. The second challenge which grows out of the reality of complex identity is that we have lost the art of the particular. We're trying to justify this choice and not create a life which gives perpetuation to that choice. More than that, the particular doesn't travel so well in a complex identity. You want to know an example of a particular? This. This is a particular. This is something that I wear wherever I go. I have a rule, I don't travel anywhere that I don't feel comfortable wearing. I'm a Jew, and I want to be a part of the world as a Jew. And this is my symbol that I'm a Jew. I feel proud of it. And when I come to the world, yes, I'm a Jew. Shalom Aleichem, hello, how are you? But if I have a complex identity, I don't want this. Because this works 3 days. But when I'm out there, I don't want this. I don't want complex symbols. Shabbos, that's 52 days a year. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, great. 2 days, 3 days, safe, done. You mean I have to do this again next week? And the week after? Do you know there's about 240 Jewish holidays? I won't give you a lecture on all of them. One of the most important ones comes 5 days after Yom Kippur. It's one of the most beautiful Jewish holidays. Sukkot, it's called. where we build these tabernacles. It's filled, you build it with your children, and you decorate it, and you eat all your meals there, and if you want, you can sleep outside. And it's one of the few holidays that we Jews got right. We didn't make it too complicated. There's no fasting, there's no special kashrut laws. It's just joyful, and it's actually called Zman Simchatenu, the times of our joy. Do you know how many Jews keep Sukkot? Almost none. They're Jewed out by Yom Kippur. They're exhausted with themselves. They feel so filled. It's like, God, go back to Isaiah 58. You know, what is Isaiah 58? Lama tzamnu v'lo. We fasted. Why didn't you? Like, we fasted 25 hours. We think the world, you know, God owes us for eternity. You know, again, the second problem, when you have a complex identity, you tend to rob your tradition of some of its most beautiful, vibrant, and vital cultural particular features, because you want to be able to move back and forth and back and forth. You want Christmas and Hanukkah as one shot. And you lose your particular. When you lose your particular, you lose one of the essential foundations of identity and joy. And you don't even know that you're doing it. And you think you can dance from great ideas to great ideas, not understanding that that's not how human beings build an identity and a life. The third is that in this complex identity, we lose our boundaries. No society has ever survived without some boundary delineating what it means to be in and what it means not to be in. And I don't mean necessarily boundaries imposed by society, but at least the members understand that if I say I am a Jew, I am saying something about myself. That means I accept what? Today, if you ask the Jewish people to answer the following question, to be a Jew means, there is no singular answer that you will find the Jewish people could agree upon. In a world of complex identities, where you live in multiple places, you draw upon the features of each one of those identities. Now that, by the way, is one of the gifts of complex identities, because religious traditions live in a dialogue with a larger world, and they end up being improved by it. Because new ideas, cross-fertilization, which would have never been a part of your intellectual ghetto, are now part of your society, not from the outside. It's not an external critic who you listen to. You yourself are experiencing different modalities which end up enriching who you are. But in order to maintain that complex identity, you are extremely fearful of any conversation of boundaries. Because I want to be mobile. You don't talk about boundaries. You don't talk about core. Today, you know, there's a number of rabbis here, and they'll attest to it. Every Jew believes that they have an inalienable right to do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want, and to still be declared a good Jew by their rabbi. To say to someone, excuse me, you can't? What do you mean I can't? Vup, I go to my other identity. And so we have a whole conversation, well, we need to be welcoming mats because everybody's panicking, because if everybody's rotating back and forth between all their complex identities, everybody has to make sure that their place is wonderful and welcoming and joyful, etc. And the way you do that is a complete destruction of any discussion of standards and expectations. Because we're afraid, and the roast, oh, you're going to turn them away. Without any notion, if there is no there, why should they even want to be there? What are you turning them away from? The third challenge of complex identities is the building of a community without any boundaries. Building of Jewish lives in which people aren't creating standards and expectations. And it's extremely difficult to even begin that conversation. In my community, the most extensive, innovative, solution which we've come up with in the last 30 years, one which is being funded by Jews all across North America, is a program called Birthright. I don't know if any of you heard of it. It's a program which funds a free trip to Israel for 10 days to anyone who identifies themselves as a Jew, funded by the Jewish community, as the solution to the challenges of modernity. But what do you do? 10-day trip to Israel with college students? This is as good as you, this is it? Like, and the program is explicitly devoid of content. No, as its program. Take a bunch of college students on a bus, hormones, a little alcohol, some drugs. They're going to have fun in Israel. Fun in Israel, that's the welcoming mat. Having fun. And these kids for the first time are having Jewish fun. Now is it a good program? Whatever. Is this it? You shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. That's it. A 10-day fun trip. This is as far as you got. This is what happens. Like, I'm looking and I'm cringing. I imagine how God's feeling. This is what I wanted from you? But when you have a complex identity and you don't have boundaries, you couldn't say, okay, let's get them to Israel and let's actually have a class every day. Let's make sure that every day they study, they're on 10 days, there's the Jewish value of the day. 10 different, what? No. Modernity has last and not most significantly though, but very significantly, also challenged the notion of what Jewish community means. One of the interesting features of the Jewish tradition is that Judaism is a collective religious life. It's not a religious life for an individual who wants to stand before God. In our tradition, an individual Jew cannot stand before God other than in the midst of this community. When the Jewish people sin in the golden calf, God says to Moses, go down. And the rabbis say, what happens when God said to Moses, go down? The whole Bible was leading up to the giving of the Torah, and it's like a Seinfeld do-over. Excuse me, no, go down. We're not doing this now. The rabbis say, what happened? And the rabbis of the Talmud Tractate Brachot state that God said to Moses, Moses, I have given you greatness only for the sake of the people. And now that they have sinned, why do I want thee? There is no place on the mountain in my tradition for individuals of excellence if the community is not there. Inherent to being a Jew is to be part of a people. When I am a Jew, I am part of the children of Israel. That's the way I see myself. In a world of complex identities, we are redefining Judaism. Very often, in Christian terms, as spirituality, the whole Kabbalah stuff, no one knows what it means, but it's just sort of, if Madonna's doing it, why so should I? What exactly? But it's, the notion of a people or of a religious tradition which sees itself as a people is being redefined when people see themselves as belonging to multiple communities simultaneously. If I would have told anyone in Jewish history that these are our challenges, they would have responded and said, is anybody killing you? And I'd say, no. And they'd say, I'll take your challenges over mine. See, there is one very simple solution to the world of, or the challenges of, complex identities. And that solution is actually in many of your hands. You can do a great service to my people and help solve the problems of complex identity. All you need to do is hate me again. See, what's making it even more complicated is that over the last 30 years, the world hasn't hated us enough. You know what anti-Semitism does? Anti-Semitism creates singular identities. It's phenomenal. I think I'm a doctor. I'm the doctor. What do they see me as? Jew. Oh, I'm conservative, you're reform. You're Jewish. Hitler didn't have one amount of gas that he gave for observant Jews, a different amount of gas for liberal Jews. You were Jewish. Anti-Semitism shrinks the world, shrinks the notion that I'm living in a larger world which is accepting me, where I have multiple identities that I can be a part of, and it puts me smack down back again in a clear singular identity. If there is a 10% rise of anti-Semitism in North America, intermarriage will decrease by 15%. Remember, if I am marrying a non-Jew, that means there's somebody who is marrying me. Now, throughout Jewish history, nobody would have married a Jew. What are you, nuts? Yeah, I want to see a pogrom from the inside? What are you wouldn't have married a Jew. Jews weren't marriageable. The fact that you're marrying me and that I'm marrying you means that we're accepting each other. The fact that I could watch the movie Independence Day, and if you remember the movie Independence Day, right before Jeff Goldblum and whatever his name and Will Smith were going up to save the world? 4th of July, Independence Day. You remember that movie? So they decided to create a little prayer group, right? Now the Minister of Defense, Secretary of Defense, was one of you. Remember? And he comes, and I think it's Judd Hirsch is sitting there, and he's setting up this prayer group. And he says, come on in and pray, Secretary. He says, I can't, I'm not Jewish. And Judd Hirsch says the following line, nobody's perfect. Now, which moment in history could a Jew have said that to a Christian and not be killed? At which moment in history could that be part of a culture? North America, the United States, you have welcomed my people. We feel at home here. If you made me feel a stranger, then my identity would be secure. But if that's the only way for me to survive, I will leave. The fundamental challenge that we face when we think about modernity is, are we going to still be a people who aspires to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation? Modernity has become a major force for mediocrity. It has created great ideas, great opportunities, great advancements. But we need to reconnect to who we are as a people. Are we going to be a people which needs anti-Semitism in order to survive? Or are we going to be a people who could generate a life force which it will not create singular identities again, but will create a life force that within this complex identity, being Jewish will be something that will shine. Being Jewish will be something that will touch me. Being Jewish will be something that I want to be a part of, not for chauvinistic or racial reasons, but because there's ideas, life, color, joy, which draws me and which I want to be a part of. This is the challenge that we face as a people. There's this very, very beautiful rabbinic midrash in which God speaks to Abraham and says, your people shall be as numerous as the stars in the heaven. And another one says, oh, your people will be as numerous as the sand on the seashore. And the rabbis say, what do I need all these analogies for? And they say, it's very simple. Who do you want to be? Do you want to be like the sand, Or do you want to be like the stars? Who we're going to be in modernity? Maybe we'll continue. Interesting question. Are we going to be like the stars? Are we going to be a people who are carriers of great ideas, great joy and great meaning, which everyone who is a Jew will want to be a part of? If we can reach that standard, then modernity will not be a challenge, but will be something which we can thrive in and reach within it new heights. Thank you.